92, 93. South Africa is collapsing. It's going to hell in a handbasket. Flames everywhere. We nearly went bankrupt about 3 times, and a miracle happened. And we can take a clue from Mandela because
John Hunt, so good to have you here. I find it fascinating when somebody is able to do so many different things, many of them in the creative world, but I consider you to be an advertising giant, a novelist, a playwright, an incredible entrepreneur, with one of the most powerful tenures that I've ever experienced. You're a mentor. I've probably left out a few things. So many different versions of John Hunt to me. Do you identify as so many different people, or do you feel like because they're all in the creative field that these aren't different personality types of John Hunt?
To be very honest, I've never thought about it in quite such a exact way. I think I'm much more of a naturalist, if that makes sense. So if you're creative, or whatever the term is, if you enjoy ideas, I think we sometimes have a problem in the world where you feel you have to be narrow. I don't think there's a dictate or holy scripture that says thou shalt do one thing and one thing alone. And I always found from a very early age I like doing quite a few things. So is that a jack of all trades? I don't know. But if you are, it's always tricky using an adjective like creative because it's also a very overused word. But if you're in that area, I started off writing at high school. And to be honest, that was the only thing I was really good at. Then after the army and doing all the normal things you do, I was extraordinarily lucky that one of the articles I wrote for a magazine was published. The person who I gave the article to, I didn't know, was in advertising. She was my girlfriend's mother. And she said, that's good, you should think about advertising. I had no idea what advertising was. I went to my interview in a suit and tie. But writing led to advertising led to playwriting led to novels. But it makes you an entrepreneur in the sense that I think you join dots that maybe other people don't see or feel uncomfortable with. And I've never really been too afraid of failure. So that's probably another good principle because if you experiment, it's terrific because you learn more from failure than from success. But if you stop yourself from failing, you often stop yourself from growing. So thank you for the wonderful introduction, but a lot of it hides a lot. Ooh, that was a mess, or ooh, that didn't work out so well. You keep growing through that, and then perhaps you have a different perspective at the end of it.
Tell me about ideas. How would you define an idea?
So there's no, depending on the industry or the silo you want to play in, I think the best definition I have of an idea is something that's not bullied by the status quo. So what happens 9 times out of 10 is something exists in whatever, and there's a pattern, and people have got stuck in the pattern 9 times out of 10 from habit. Not because it's the best, but over time it becomes habit. Now habit's okay to a small degree because it's nice not to have to think too much in the morning that your underpants go on before your pants. That's an okay habit. But to have a habit that you come to work, things have to be done this way, or your life has to be governed by these principles. Are they there because they're the best, or are they there because it's habit? And having ideas gives you the right to question what I think is 9 times out of 10 pure habit.
Incredible. What are some of those habits? So if you look at a blank page, I think it's one of the things I'm most afraid of. Yeah. And you sit down in the morning or the evening or whenever it is as a writer, What are some of the habits that help you get past that blank page?
So again, coming back to fear of failure, release the tension of, oh my God, what am I going to write? So if you allow yourself just to be in the moment, it's surprising how things come to you. If you kind of, I know this sounds strange, a bit Zenish, but if you chase something too hard, it goes away or keeps its distance. So if you can relax and be in the moment, you generally find that it sorts itself out. It's a little mystical, I suppose, but if you need principles, I find appropriate amount of time, relaxed. If the rest of your life is maybe a little bit more sorted, it's, happy wife, happy family, happier, probably a little bit easier, but not always, because a lot of people have written as a counterbalance to tough times they're going through or so. But let it be, let it enter rather than you almost, and I see a lot of it now, people needing to know the end before they've started. You start the path before you know where it goes, and then you enjoy the journey. Even in advertising, we have a lot of people who sort of come and say to me, I'm not happy. I've been here for 6 months and I haven't made a difference. Give it a little time, relax. The journey isn't always instant, and I think we've developed a habit sometimes where we want instant gratification. And whether it's looking at a blank page or your career or whatever, sometimes just chilling helps a bit.
How do you chill? Like, what are some of the things that you do if you were to write your next novel? And you can tell us a little bit about what you have planned as well. How would you get into that mindset?
So over the years, I have developed a pattern. In the mornings, I meditate for normally 3/4 of an hour to an hour. But I say meditate, it's my version. I don't claim any mystical, I don't put a rock on my head but I think we need peace, particularly in the world today. So that's where I start. That's my base. I then start off by drinking healthy drinks, and by 10 o'clock I'm into coffee, and the game is on. And that works for me. It might not work for someone else. And being aware of what's around you, I think, is very helpful, because going back to joining the dots, if you allow yourself to be open to change, be open to watching learning from other people, it solves itself. I think people who are very rules-based battle with that because they want to know the 5 rules too. And maybe your 5 rules will be different to my 5 rules. So the trick is for you as an individual to say, experiment. This works for me, this doesn't. It's not really what John Hunt says, it's what you experience. And then if I say something that might be helpful, terrific. If it's not, hit the mental delete button.
What I've heard you say, if we take a step back, is that fear of failure is one of the potential barriers to creativity. I've also heard you talk about getting comfortable with ambiguity, if that's correct, if I could say it that way. So getting comfortable with not knowing what the end is. Does that also just mean, or potentially part of that is kind of falling in love with the means, with the process, the journey?
Yeah, I think it means you as an individual suddenly finding, the path opening up a little bit. It's if you want right now to know all the answers, see all the signboards, I think that's very rare. But if you're prepared to start the journey, one step at a time, but you're not scared of failure, but you also understand there's a certain persistence. There's a certain get up and do it again and again. So it's not necessarily easy, but if you're persistent, you sort of earn the right to, okay, now I'm going to take the next step. So again, the cliche of enjoying the journey. It's sometimes painful, but you look back, hey, I've made 10 steps. I was only 6 steps yesterday. Writing, I'm on page 17. A week ago, I was on page 5. Kind of helps.
I can relate to the journey being painful as an entrepreneur, and I've been lucky enough on my journey to work on a number of different projects with you. And something that really has stood out to me is how, and perhaps the meditation practice that I didn't know about, is part of that consciousness, that ability to very quickly get switched on into the conversation. And something that I've always taken away from our discussions is how engaged you are with the detail, and how you don't miss a beat as part of the process. And I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've worked with a lot of great creative people. And that's one thing that's really stood out for me. It's almost as if, and correct me if I'm wrong, it really feels like you know what your purpose is in that meeting, in that discussion. You know the role that you play so confidently. It really does feel that way to me. I'm curious to know from you, how do you see your purpose in life? How would you describe that if you had to?
That is a deep and burrowing question. I think, you have many purposes. I think if you can get up in the morning and you go through 12 hours, 24, whatever it is, and you go to sleep the next evening, and you've had integrity of purpose. If that can be your organizing principle, the rest falls into place. It also helps you get rid of a lot of the ancillary stuff. Think of how many meetings you have for the sake of meetings. How many conversations are sometimes well-meaning, but sometimes just calendar filling. I think also as you get a bit older, it's not that your threshold for that gets less, but you see the value of time. If you can put food on the table and you've got a roof over your head and you give your children love and straight teeth, that's pretty much done. Then it comes down to how the currency is time. How much value do you put into time? So I think, going back to the purpose thing, if you can be a little bit focused about what you want to achieve, not in like a bombastic way, but this will help me achieve, this won't, or this is time well spent, this isn't. It's something that is accretive. As you do it more and more, you kind of get a sense, a spidey, say, oh, that's going to be a lot of time for very little reward. I don't know if there's a rule for that, but it's just a good awareness thing to have in the back of your mind.
I think also I identified that you tend to find the signal in all of the noise. And I've never worked with anybody who seems to be able to get to that so quickly. We've had a number of like short meetings where it feels like you get to the real crux of it so quickly. And I realize it seems from the outside that's very intuitive for you. And it feels like you really do, and you've spoken about this in the past, you spoke about it in the Art of the Idea, you seem to trust your gut. For the sake of the audience in this context, the people who may be listening to this, what do you think are some of the ways that I could, even if you just take me as an example, trust my gut? If I tend to overthink things.
So probably the first principle is to use your gut. Intuition is a thing that can be practiced, and then I think the more you do that, the more you get better at it. Just like anything, practice helps. That doesn't mean you be careful, because the other side is, oh, I know everything and shut up and listen to me, which is not that. There are many of those people around as well. So I think with intuition should go an ability to listen to other people, because it's a loop. It's not it's not a one person, I've got the answers now, be quiet. It's more a loop of intuition and listening. If you have just, you think it's intuition, it could end up being just bully boy rubbish. And if you just listen, you can also end up just meandering all over the place. So, in most meetings, particularly now in a world of Teams and Zoom and blah, 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 it's really important not to end up on a sort of a wave of noise. And everyone is really agreeing with everyone, but you're making zero progress. And you get to the end of the meeting and everyone's kind of like, hey, wow, wonderful, and clappy hands and thumbs up. But there's not really a sense of direction or not a tight sense of direction. And I think that direction comes from listening to what everyone's got to say. And then, does everyone agree we should do X? Because there was a lot of sort of bully boy or bully person people, and they claim intuition, but it's really just corporately, my title is bigger than yours.
Highest paid salary in the room.
Yeah.
Let's get back to failure. What would you define, and it's okay if there's more than one example, as the biggest failure that you've learned from, or any example that comes to mind?
I think we sometimes see failure as running into a wall at 100 meters, and then that's and some of those are failures. But I think it's also learning from the small failures. I'm a little bit dyslexic, always was. So high school I thought was a bit of a failure because I couldn't spell properly, and So, but you then learn around it. You're okay. So, how does that go? And learning from failing makes you stronger. So it sounds a bit, this was but failure is just the other side of connecting yourself to hopefully not fail the next time around. Plenty of failures. People need more practical examples. Hunt Lascaris, we nearly went bankrupt about 3 times in the early days because we did not know anything about finance. So the faster the agency grew, the more bankrupt we became. How's that? You've got to be pretty thick, It's bizarre. We started an agency and then realized, oh, shit, we need officers. So we were the first mobile agency because we just had cars. Now, it's a failure to be that stupid, but it's also a learning to then go, shit, we better get officers quick, and so on and so on and so on. So there's been lots of failures. There have been campaigns that haven't worked. There's been lots of things that haven't certainly gone as planned, but it's how do you get yourself out of that downward spiral? Life is peaks and troughs, peaks and troughs, peaks and troughs. The trick is to flatten the troughs and increase the angle of the peaks. But to think life is all, straight line, never ever. Well, certainly not in my lifetime.
I can relate to that too. Let's talk a little bit more about the work that you've done. I've done a lot of research, even after working with you. There's so much more that it feels like we could unpack together just about your working career. And I don't think we're going to get enough time to go through all the detail. One of the campaigns that really stands out to me, at least, may be the one that comes to mind for you. I'd love to know what you feel is the work of your life. What do you feel like, out of everything that you've done, what stands out to you to be the most important thing in work life itself?
Sure, there's a tricky one. But I'll give you kind of one or two answers, if I may. From an emotional feeling you've made a bit of a difference would be the campaign we did many years ago and still doing today for Reach for a Dream. So there's a lovely story there. My son goes to school. He's now 7, and he has a boy in his class who's suffered the horrors of cancer. And the boy comes to school, and they know he's going to come in without any hair. So they all shave their hair off. Wonderful story. I hear about it. We make a little film for Reach for a Dream because they were connected with it. And we've now had a 35-year relationship with Reach for a Dream. It's the most amazing organization ever. They fulfill 6,000 dreams a year. Just extraordinary, helping children who have life-threatening diseases. And I've had a wonderful relationship with them. So out of nothing, and the agency has done a wonderful job in supporting them, and they're fabulous. So you feel you've contributed. Then you can do a jump to 92, 93. South Africa is collapsing. It's going to hell in a handbasket. Flames everywhere. And we did the Nelson Mandela campaign. So that was interesting. Bomb threats in the building. My phone was tapped. All that kind of spy, dramatic stuff that was there. And I was living in the eye of the storm. And then a year or two later, that we launched the Constitution. So, where on earth do you get the honor to work with someone like Nelson Mandela and then launch the country's constitution? It's bizarre. It's just so wonderful. And before that, we did the peace campaign, which which was part of the campaign that allowed for the elections, which allowed for the Constitution. So there was a wonderful period where there was madness in the country and a miracle happened. And we can take a clue from Mandela, because in our very, very first meeting, we were all terrified, of course. And there's a whole general discussion going on about, what the campaign should be. And there was someone in the room who was very aggressive and wanted, in a way, correctly so, to, balance the scales. And we've been brutalized for so many years. Wanted to come up and to be quite honest, that's absolutely correct. And Mandela said, we have to be very careful here, because if we plan for the future to be based on just correcting the past, we have to be very, very careful, because when does correcting the past become revenge? And once you start revenge, there's another spiral. And it's always stuck with me. And the campaign that followed was very positive. When you think about it, you just have every reason to be negative. And he told the world what he wanted South Africa to be, not how terrible. Everyone knew that. But there was more ammunition there than you'd ever need to really put the boot in. And the campaign was very restrained, very forward-looking, because Mandela understood that although the negative was valid, you slip into revenge, and the self-righteousness of the world, which I think there's a lot of right now, just gets you on a spiral that's almost impossible to get yourself out of. So for me, to be able to talk about playing a tiny, tiny role, as myself and the agency, in that span, peace campaign, free elections, launch a constitution, I'll take that.
I must be honest, every time I think about that, I tend to, whoever's in the room, I tend to shout out, like, did you know that John worked on the peace campaign? Did you realize that? Did you realize he worked directly with Nelson Mandela? And I was doing that all weekend. Again, and I've done it so many times. I've looked into your history, or I've needed to look up something for your bio, or understand like where Hunt Lascaris has come from.
Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing. I really think it also comes at the same time with somebody who has a level of groundedness and, if I can say for you, a level of humility that I'm not used to experiencing with people who've achieved what you've achieved. How do you keep yourself so grounded in the process of that? Coming from the history, the level of impact that you've made, a global career, just one of those things, I think, could give somebody an overly inflated ego.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, but what I do know is you get a snort clap very quickly in life every time you start believing your own PR. So there's no, again, rule. I think you are who you are and you just behave naturally. But there is a real call out in the back of my mind of people who, I call it flatulent with their own self-belief. And those are wary. I don't like those people too much.
And do you believe you tend to be the sum of the people that you are closest with, that you associate yourself with?
Yeah, I think, I'm extraordinarily lucky to have a wonderful wife who's been just so supportive and, 3 terrific kids. And also that's where the grounding comes, because you need, it's like easy to rattle off an important CV, not so easy to understand the role family and friends have played in shaping that. And, so much credit goes to them, because you can maybe wander off or disappear up your own sense of importance, which is probably not a good place to be.
What would you say is the most important lesson that you learned in the process of that early career? Let's say that real 1992 to 1998 period where you've got these big, globally impactful, especially to South Africa, level of work. What do you think are some of the big learnings there, if any, stand out?
Probably the single biggest one is to believe before it's true. Because the logic over that period often pointed the other way. So why should you believe? So when we, did the first Mandela Committee, a lot of people didn't like us. And technically, you could say, well, they had a good point, because the ANC's stated thing was, to nationalize everything. So why would an agency work for a political party that was going to nationalize everything? Didn't make much sense. But we didn't think that really was. So there was a belief that there's a certain, the miracle could happen, and there's a belief that maybe good can come from bad. We did a lot of work, for example, with the Solidarity Fund in the pandemic, and you straight away see the best of people and the worst of people. Now you decide which one do you want to be. People were generous with their time, their money, they helped. People played violin concertos in balconies for people across the way, and corrupt people stole. Both are true, but it helps if you believe the positive, and try and at least harness that energy, because the reasons for being negative are technically valid as well. I just don't think they're very helpful.
Would you consider yourself to be an optimist?
I do.
And do you ever practice any form of envisioning of the future? Have you ever written the $10 million check to yourself, or?
Not really. I tend to be more of a persistent kind of guy rather than and the future shall be. If you can live the next 24 hours with maybe a bit of authenticity and optimism, it'd probably help you with the next 24 and the next 24. I think it's a little tricky to say in 10 years' time X, and then you feel like a failure if it hasn't happened, and also difficult in this world to predict, what's going to happen in the next hour.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about the future. Are you optimistic about the future of the world, of South Africa?
Optimistic in that I think we will find our way through it. Very disappointed in much of what's happening in the world right now on many, many levels, because it feels as if there's a lot of going back, lots of the biggest man in the room wins kind of stuff. But as always, I think a counterbalance begins. And I think we're in the beginning of the counter swing. And hopefully that will release the antidote to much of the pain at the moment. So I'm optimistic on that.
Let's talk a little bit more about that antidote. What do you think the world needs more of now?
A lot of things, but mainly I suspect an ability to find a middle ground. So it feels to me as if the deal is you chase each other into an opposite corner and you yell the shit out of each other. That's the operating principle. And anyone who tries to find some middle ground gets yelled by both sides as being fake or terrible or horrible or not committed. So somehow we need leadership that finds a path that isn't didactically left or right, red or blue, whatever the things are.
It just blows my mind. I get goosebumps whenever you talk like that. Like, it's just, does that feel real to you?
Real behind the scenes as well in front of the camera. And
Literally.
Politicians are almost,
Yeah.
are we on?
Yeah.
We're on camera.
Yeah.
We're not on camera.
Yeah. Same guy.
Same guy.
Amazing, yeah.
Remarkable.
Yeah, I suppose that's the only way that you can really make the difference that he did.
Yeah.
Okay, this is take 2.
So we've talked about the future of the world, and we've touched on some of the antidote to some of the, let's say, the ways of working, as the current operating system exists. Let's talk more about your future. I was very excited to see your Rewirement announcement. What does the future hold for John Hunt?
So I think, again, this rule that you reach a certain age or thank the Lord you are healthy and all those things. But if that's a given, there's no sacred text again that says, and when thou hast reached this age, I shall wander off into the long grass or smoke a pipe and watch, late afternoon soap operas on TV. So very lucky. I have quite a different view of the future. Now I still keep very close contact with my friends at Nando's. We have a nice wine business. Want to write more. And connected to the writing, we're starting a little publishing house called Painted Dog Press, where we will hope to, first year we'll publish 5, maybe 6 books, South African, English, Afrikaans, hopefully in time African as well. Books that they'll all be fiction, but interesting stories. And the quality of that story hopefully will be the linkage to Painted Dog. It's not genre-based. It's not anything except hopefully a group of people looking at the book going, this is real quality and this is interesting. It's the ultimate challenge. I feel a bit like Don Quixote attacking a windmill, because you say, publishing books, and everyone goes like, what? Isn't that, it's a bit like this saying calligraphy, the ancient art of reading. But I love reading, I love literature, and I think perhaps we can take a little punt at getting not just older people, but younger people interested in really well-written stories which ignite the imagination, that make you feel, maybe you can conquer the world. So that's my next mad charge into my next battle.
Incredible. We'll add a link to Painted Dog Press in the show notes so
Excellent.
that people can go and visit the site and see what you're releasing as you release it. And
That would be wonderful.
it'll have all the socials there as well, so people can follow and see the journey, as it unfolds. Let's talk a little bit more about why people in the audience, people out there, South Africa, abroad, why do you think people should read fiction?
So I have a deep sense that most truths from year dot have been told via stories. And the stories generally kind of like create a 2/3 loop. By that I mean it sets it up. You describe the characters, fiction doesn't really matter. But the reader then closes the last third. That's where the learning, that's where the imagination gets used. And I think reading literature does that much better than screen time. I have nothing against Netflix and Disney and whatever, but I do think when you watch something on a screen, you're a more passive engager, and when you read something, different happens in your brain. And I think that's where all the way going back to joining those dots, I think you join dots in your mind differently. If I were to write, the tall, gorgeous blonde walked into the room, everyone will have a slightly different imagination on what a tall, gorgeous blonde looks like. If it's on cinema, there she is, boom. So I think there's just a wonderful activation that happens in your mind when you read. I don't really mind if it's fiction or non-fiction, but I just think in a story, the fiction has a greater chance of activating your brain, sending you to places you haven't been before. And I know, certainly for me growing up, I used that book as my spectacular travel source. I went everywhere in my bedroom thanks to literature.
That's beautiful. The reading's been the same thing for me.
Yeah.
I really believe that if people want to be able to understand psychology and understand people, one of the best sources of an understanding of human beings, understanding of psychology, is reading fiction. Because the way that the character develops, the way that you project onto the character, and I'm sure as a writer,
Exactly.
I've never written anything beyond an essay, but I can imagine that there must be quite a lot of projection in the process of that, and then with the reader absorbing the same thing, and to understand how the human condition exists and evolves.
I think that's. I think when you write, certainly for me, it allows you to create a third person in the room, because you writing about something which ends up in the book. The reader then has the reverse process. They can read it and look at the characters you've created through their eyes. And I think a great book asks you to think. It doesn't tell you what to think. And that's where the genius, that's where you love stories that and did this happen? Did that happen? I'm a bit like that. Maybe whatever it is, love story, detective story. Who cares? You live that thing in a more visceral way than I think most movies or whatever. And we need to always expand our thinking a little, and fiction for me certainly helps me a lot.
The next John Hunt book is also in the works. Next novel, if I'm correct. When can we expect that? And
so it'll be kind of interesting. The next one will be probably second half of this year. Little Orwellian. And again, we're trying something new. Furi, my partner at Paint a Dog, called it a Splice book, which is a novel with illustrations in it. So it's not a graphic novel, it's a novel, and it's not got these little illustrative notes in the corner. We've got a terrific villain from London who's doing these beautiful drawings for us. So hopefully that'll appeal to maybe a younger market as well. Proper novel, but it's got beautiful artwork in it, which might attract a new audience. Again, this is one of those fingers crossed. Is this a failure? Brewing, will it be a success? I do not have a single clue, but let's go for it. And then after that, long time in the distance, we have, I think, a very, strange love letter to Joburg, but that maybe we can talk about later.
Yeah, I'm excited to read both of them, and I'm excited to see the format for the Splice book too. It sounds very, it sounds immersive, which I imagine is part of the reason behind the illustrations. And I think we could use more love letters to Joburg too. So I'm excited for that. Where to next, John? Is there something I should have asked you that you think might help the audience? Understanding the format of Never Think Alone is to bring more detail on the way that you think, and perhaps unlock some of the principles as we have. We've spoken about some of your habits, your optimistic beliefs, some of the behavior like meditation. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Nothing springs to mind. I think as an organizing principle, I find very few successful pessimists. I understand realists. I think you do now, with social media, your bandwidth is so full of so much stuff. It's almost I just put up like a little red flag. Be careful that your realism isn't pushed into pessimism, because that's what you're fed. The algorithm will certainly confirm your darkest thoughts. 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have that. So it's really more to, I think as an organizing principle, to try and be in charge of the direction of your thinking, on the understanding that there are lots of forces now that can, without you maybe realizing it, pull you a little into the shadows. We never had that, growing up. But I do find a lot of people very, very knowledgeable about the negative stuff. And while you mustn't be Pollyanna, there is a difference between hugging the negative versus being a realist. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. And the other thing I would just go back to, because it's a real, certainly in my life, it's been the big, is the belief in something before it's achieved. Not to bullshit yourself that everything is, but to go, everything starts small, whether you're Apple or Microsoft. It was a tiny company somewhere along the line. Now, they had to believe they would one day be Apple. Choose any company you like. Everything starts tiny. Everything starts in the garage. Everything starts in someone's brain. Everyone goes, I wonder if. There is no ways they knew then how successful they were going to be. So you are allowed to play that game. Don't make silly risks just for that. But I'm saying, if you don't have enough of a dream in you, it's impossible, because that's your stretch point. So dream on.
That's such a wonderful note. And we'll more than likely wrap up on that. There's 2 more rapid fire questions that I'll ask. I'll use myself as an example. So what I've found is I tend to listen to a whole bunch of content, absorb a whole bunch of thinking. Some of the smartest people in the world are giving you all those reasons that you mentioned to be nihilistic, to be realistic about what the future looks like. How do you filter that out? Because what I find is I tend to get into this trap. And I was saying it to my partner the other day. I was saying, these are all the things we have to be worried about when it comes to AI. And, AI is going to do this. And by 2030, it would have solved all of humankind's problems. So then, where's my role as a problem solver? And I get caught in that loop. Yeah. And then you realize, wow, this isn't the way that I think. This is all the thinking that's happening around me. And by osmosis or augmentation, I'm absorbing all that information. My nature is not to be Pollyanna. It's not to just go with the flow. But I find myself getting stuck in that loop. And I will go in swings and roundabouts. If I listen to a bunch of very optimistic content about the future, I'll feel super optimistic. And then the next week I'll listen to a whole bunch of pessimistic stuff about AI and how it's going to take our jobs, and then I'll swing in the other direction. Notwithstanding, I have the ability to not listen to the content, but if I still want to stay informed, I still want to watch the news. How do you stay optimistic? How could the audience stay optimistic in spite of all of that?
So one thing that helps is that, imagine it's 150 years ago and you're sitting on your horse and the motor car goes past. Shit. And you're the world's best horse salesman, I don't know, whatever. I remember at Hunt Lascaris, I came in one morning and there was a queue to my office, literally 20 people, and they were pissed. Why were they annoyed? I put a thing called an Apple computer into the studio. And it's not real, this is the death, and it was all catastrophe. You have these huge step changes, and I know AI is a particularly big one, and blah, 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 and right now the whole world fragmenting, it's tough. But I do believe in the inherent good of people. I do believe in the inherent originality of thought. And I think in the end, while we will go through many loops and changes, just like the horse and the car, just like the airbrush artist we had who suddenly had to sit next to a computer, there will be a way, it'll be very different, it'll be changed, but collectively, the good in people and our ability to adapt somehow combines to find something new. Go all the way back to 1994 in South Africa. A lot of the very smartest people were saying, this is the end, climbing on planes, leaving for Sydney, New York, London. I'm not saying they were wrong. I'm just saying, look, things adapted again. So my optimism really comes from a genuine belief that we have an incredible ability to adapt, almost to infinity. And when push comes to shove, there are more good people than there are bad. So that shift will end up being positive, even if initially it doesn't look that way.
Beautiful. John Hunt, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. I'd love to give a stab at joining some of the dots. So we've talked about your optimism, which I think we all need a lot more of. We've talked about the integrity of purpose, and how at the end of the day, going to bed knowing that you've achieved something that day. And as you said, that you sent your kids to bed with straight teeth, paraphrasing. We talked about using your gut and intuition to protect yourself from the signal-noise ratio. We've also spoken about the peaks and troughs, of your career, the 10-year incredible work that you've done, learning from failure as part of that process. We went through some of the amazing and still mind-blowing experiences that you've had as an entrepreneur, creative, and a multi-hyphenate writer on every single level. We've also spoken about your Rewirement, and very excited to read the new book, learn more about Painted Dog too. Out of all these things, the thing that really feels the most prevalent to me is that belief. And it really does feel, from your point of view, it's not just a belief in yourself, the significant belief that you have in other people.
Yeah.
And your ability as a leader to identify those people and identify what it is that makes them special and unlock that so quickly. I've never worked with anybody like you. I think it's been a pleasure as part of that experience. I count myself very lucky to have shared in some of the projects that we worked on together, shared this time together too. I hope the next time we chat will be over a glass of wine, as you said, another one of your many endeavors. And I'm really looking forward to that too, John. Thank you so much for your time today.
I've loved the talk. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
The Never Think Alone podcast is brought to you by my tech and experience design agency, Plus Narrative. Plus Narrative has been focused on people-first development, design, and strategy since 2013. I'm a little biased, but if you have an innovation, user experience, or software project brief, or you just need a trained strategist to facilitate your next workshop, I cannot think of a better team to help. We're based in South Africa and Mauritius, but we work with clients and companies all over the world. If you want to find out more, go to plusnarrative.com. We'll put a link in the show notes too. That's plusnarrative.com.